This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. Rundown! I'm Carrie Saldo. Good morning. It is Friday, March 20th, 2026. Our Rundowners this week. Chris Maza, executive editor of Reminder Publishing, on the phone. In the studio with us today, Springfield Republican newspaper reporter Stephanie Barry and Bridgette Davis, assistant professor of public policy at UMass Amherst. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Some broader context for the week's news. Eid, celebrating the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, is today. And Nowruz, the Iranian or Persian New Year, begins today. That's a several week-long celebration. We are looking perhaps at a little bit of luck of the Irish for one particular story in this week's news. The headline, impounded subway car shells to be released, employees furloughed to be called back to work. This was reported by Jim Kinney in the Springfield Republican, quoting his work. U.S. Customs and Border Protection will release imported subway car shells that have been impounded for months, leading to furloughs at a Springfield factory. That company, CRRC of Massachusetts, furloughed 142 employees Monday because work on subway cars for the MBTA and for Los Angeles couldn't continue without a supply of uncompleted car shells from China. The furloughs left 280 people still employed at the plant in East Springfield. And with a new promise that the shells will be released by Customs, CRRC says it will gradually resume operations with the goal of recalling affected employees from furlough. And that was from Lydia Rivera, a CRRC spokeswoman. Bridgette, as you're looking at this, a 10-month delay, they were held up by Customs. And now it seems like Congressman Richard Neal had a chat over either some green beers or a couple of shots of whiskey at a St. Patrick's Day celebration with Susie Wiles, President Trump's chief of staff, at an event in Washington, D.C., and now the cars are being released. What do you make of this?
I had so many questions. I wondered what voters would think. I mean, with Neil clearly got this done very seamlessly. He said his staff prepped a card that he could hand to Wiles that gave her the details. I wonder how prominent the LA cars for the Olympics were on that card.
That's right, because in addition to the several hundred cars, I think it's around 400 cars for the MBTA, there are like 70 cars-ish for the Olympics.
Yes, which I wondered if that was the motivating factor for Trump. But I really wonder, this is the kind of thing that I think makes voters both skeptical and upset about how our democracy is working in this current moment, but also you need somebody who can get things done. And the fact that Neil was able to get this done and did it so wisely by going through Wiles, who seems to have a lot of power, especially on the domestic agenda inside the Trump administration, I think was very savvy. And I know everyone's grateful for the folks to get their jobs back and for these projects to be moving.
Yeah. A little bit of backstory. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents had blocked this shipment, they said, over concerns at the Port of Philadelphia back in May of 2025, over concerns that CRRC might be using parts and materials created by children or by forced labor by members of the Uyghur ethnic minority. So a considerable human rights concern there, potentially. CRRC, for its part, had said that the company had been providing documentation to the government that it was meeting these labor requirements. What do you make of this, Chris Maza, there on the phone?
Well, pretty much, I'm in agreement that there are a lot of more questions that I feel like come up with this than anything, and it's really confusing as to really if these things were issues and concerns before, why suddenly are they not? So, I mean, we're certainly happy that we're going to be seeing more local people put to work again, but at the same time, there are questions here about the way that our government is running and how those decisions are being made.
And certainly it's a little unclear exactly when folks might be getting back to work, because it's not exactly clear how long it will take to get these shells, which are then finished at the factory here in Springfield, back to the actual plant. Stephanie Barry, as you've been kind of watching this unfold from afar, what do you make of it?
Well, I find it interesting that all it took to overcome human rights concerns was a conversation.
A 2-minute conversation is what Congressman Neal told Jim Kinney, right? So the question for you is, it then how sincere were those concerns?
Right. And I'm also wondering, the documentation that you referred to, was that because they started implementing reforms, or was it just a complete misconception that they were doing that in the first place?
Yeah. So I think that falls into that category again, like Bridgette was saying, of like lots of questions here, right? But I suppose the silver lining in all of it is we know that these families or these folks will eventually be getting back to work and getting the income they rely on for their families. But it's a really unsteady thing for these folks, or to be able to how these folks are going to proceed in the next number of weeks, or who knows how long.
Yeah, and I think we need to keep our eye on the ball about like making sure that, I know Rep. Gomez and other people are following this closely, but
The folks in Springfield State government.
yes, we're going to need to make sure that all of those jobs actually get rehired. I mean, there's a like high likelihood when these kinds of things happen that you end up just kind of letting go a number of people, and we end up at maybe 100 workers versus 144, and some under the like, well, they couldn't come back immediately because they took another job, et cetera. So I think it's something that both the press should keep an eye on, and then I think also we should keep advocating with local government officials to keep CRCC's feet to the fire.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I was talking with a source a little bit back and forth yesterday who has a close connection to the factory, and the folks who knew the furloughs were coming, right, because the company was really very public and very forthcoming. I think it was part in effort to alert perhaps, local, state, federal officials on a public way, like, this is coming, help us, please. But the folks at the factory knew furloughs were coming. They were concerned that perhaps even more than the 142 people who had been told or expected they were going to be furloughed were going to be. So the emotional roller coaster of like, yes, this was coming Monday for these folks. Maybe it's going to mean more, the anticipation, the anxiety around that. And then all of a sudden, this seemingly wonderful announcement that, oh, wait, you are going to get back to work. What an emotional roller coaster for these families, in addition to a financial roller coaster this week.
And can you imagine having that sort of power, that you're able to influence, something with far-reaching economic implications can just happen over a 2-minute conversation.
Yeah, it's quite unsettling. Well, clearly more to come on this one. All right, moving on. Some local and state officials call on Lenco Industries to reconsider future contracts with ICE. That was a headline in the Berkshire Eagle, reported recently by Tara Montes. Quoting her work here, a Pittsfield-based armored vehicle manufacturer is facing calls from some state leaders to refuse further contracts with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement until the federal agency reins in its aggressive immigrant deportation campaign. Lenco Industries, which operates three manufacturing sites in the city, currently holds the largest ICE contract in Massachusetts, according to federal spending data. It's accepted over $5.2 million in contracts with the agency over the past year to produce and repair tactical vehicles that have featured prominently in the federal agency's deportation campaign, including raids in Great Barrington here in western Massachusetts, as well as Minneapolis, which obviously has been in the news so much recently. That financial connection was first reported by the independent journalist Bill Shine in February for his newsletter, Reason Gone Mad. And the Eagle did some additional reporting this week because when Bill first reported it, not a lot of state and federal officials wanted to speak with him or were willing to go on the record. Since then, the Eagle has reported that some state and local leaders, including Governor Maura Healey, State Senator Paul Mark, and State Representative Trisha Farley Bouvier want Lenco to refuse further contracts with ICE for the time being. When you look at this, as a public policy professor, Bridgette Davis, should state and local government be getting involved with whether a private company is doing something or not?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I think that this is, first of all, the written initial reporting was really excellent, and I know a lot of it is based on activists have been out there really going through these contracts. And people who have formerly worked for the government are part of a kind of cohort of people going through these contracts and pulling out the dollar amounts and making them public so that people can report on them in this way. And activists are also pushing state leaders to take a stand. And I think that I think what's really, really difficult is the context of the economy right now. Is creating one set of pressures, and then there's the values of the Commonwealth, and I think the people of the Commonwealth, and then the pressure they put on state leaders. So is it right for them to be responsive to the public's concerns? Sure. Is it right for them to be taking a stand without the public's concerns? I mean, it's really hard to say. And I think what's really hard to think about here is, Lenco and others, other companies. It's not going to be just Lenco.
Yeah,
and it's not going to be just ICE.
Bill Schein reported that I think 19 other companies across the country are specifically taking these ICE contracts. But more broadly, Lenco is not in just fulfilling contracts for ICE. It's for police departments, perhaps fire departments. Yep. So it's more than just that one contract. Now, obviously, this is...
And does it necessarily mean that company is endorsing,
right,
a political policy? I'm not quite sure.
Lenny Light, to that point, the executive vice president of Lenco, said, quote, Lenco does not set or influence federal, state, or local policy regarding how or where these agencies operate. We believe that withholding protective equipment from authorized law enforcement personnel, whether at the state, local, or federal level, would contradict our core mission and potentially place officers and civilians at greater risk. So that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's going to be hard is we're seeing local budgets contract and state budgets contract. So their alternative source of jobs, fire departments, et cetera, they're not going to be buying big equipment right now. So the reality is, I think the pressures are going to be high to respond to both this and defense contracts. But that's not just them. Across the state of Massachusetts, defense contracts are big part of business, especially as biomedical and education have shrunk.
Right. And we've seen protesters at Smith & Wesson here in Springfield related following school shootings. So that speaks to that. That speaks to that social component. What's on the minds and hearts of people at the time. These companies that are doing business day to day become more front and center. Chris Maza, one other thing that was pointed out in the Eagles reporting is that Lenco has been considered a point of local pride for its contributions to the local economy and the job market at different times. Clearly a different position is coming to the fore now. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think that this is really difficult because you are looking at locally, you're looking at people's livelihoods. There are people who rely on Lenco being able to secure contracts that are able to allow them to continue working. But as you noted, these aren't their only contracts. But it does create a strain for the company if they're not taking those contracts, which then can put a strain on the local economy. So it's a hard balance between what might be what you think philosophically or ethically versus, even ethically, there are different things. You have a responsibility as the company to your employees as much as you do to these other things. So as far as the government getting involved with what contracts a company can or cannot take on, I think that's a bit of a slippery slope, and I really think that there's a lot of gray in here that they're trying to consider all at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, turning now to another matter where there are incredibly complex questions and complicated arguments, the U.S. and Israel's war against Iran. Chris, Reminder Publications caught up with a Western Mass resident who's trying to make the best of an extremely difficult situation where he's stranded in Beirut, Lebanon amidst the war. The headline on that story was Springfield resident stranded in Lebanon aids humanitarian efforts. What did your reporter learn?
Well, I think that one of the big things that we learned was that this was obviously the surprise attack caught everybody by surprise. This was a local resident who has decided that now that this is going on, that he has an obligation to the Lebanese people to help them in the humanitarian area, and it's something that he is struggling with. You talk about things where you've got ethical dilemmas. he's got family back home that want him home. He wants to get home to, but he also feels that there's a mission here that he has not yet accomplished.
Yeah, Hassan Murad, as your reporter Sarah Hayden reported, is a Springfield resident, and he traveled to Lebanon on business in late February, and now is having a hard time getting out. He initially did try to get a plane home, and it's very complicated, but he is raising money for supplies, food, other things. And he says on his, I think it's a GoFundMe page or an online fundraising page, that 100% of the proceeds, the money that he is collecting, is turned into donations, which he is in fact distributing on an almost daily basis to the folks who are there. All right, well, still more to come here on The Rundown, so stay with us. I am speaking with Stephanie Barry, Bridgette Davis, and Chris Maza. If you have thoughts, you can email The Rundown at nepm.org. You are listening to The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. Stay with us.
The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo, speaking with journalists Stephanie Barry and Chris Maza, and Assistant Professor of Public Policy at UMass Amherst, Bridgette Davis. All right, Stephanie, let's turn to a piece that you reported over the weekend. The headline regarded an alleged drug dealer spoils may soon be multi-million-dollar boon for the Hampden County District Attorney. I'm going to quote some of your work here, Stephanie. It's an illicit bounty unlike any Western Massachusetts law enforcement had ever seen, investigators say. Over $4 million in cash, stacks of firearms, bales of marijuana, 8 exotic cars and jewelry, a bejeweled set of brass knuckles, and a diamond bracelet worth $125,000. All of these items were recovered according to the prosecutor's inventory, the fruits of a sophisticated drug trafficking ring, they say. An investigator with knowledge of the case estimated the total value of the cars, cash, and jewelry may be as much as $7 million. It was August 2020 when Corey Taylor was arrested for drug trafficking, and these items were seized by authorities. Stephanie, the matter of who gets to profit from these items is still up for debate. Tell us more.
So there are proponents and opponents of civil forfeiture. There are certain efforts within the legislature to reform, because civil forfeiture does not really leave much in the way of wiggle room at all.
It's basically this idea that, as I understand it, opponents think that this is sort of guilty until proven innocent, and if you have done something allegedly illegal, we're going to take your stuff in the meantime.
Right, and take your stuff and put it toward good use. So, for instance, nonprofits could benefit from that, certain law enforcement agencies. So it's kind of hard to argue against. However, there are special circumstances, like in the instance of Corey Taylor. He died shortly after his arrest, and he had a pretty tight will set up, and his mother was his sole heir. So she's making the argument, well, I wasn't selling drugs, so why are you taking things from me?
And he was never found guilty, correct?
There wasn't time.
Yeah.
But he did essentially confess when the police pulled him over.
Bridgette Davis, as you're looking at this as a public policy, what do you think about civil asset forfeiture?
Yeah. So I think what's really difficult is like this kind of case, right, has all of the markings of like wild amounts of money, et cetera. And so there's kind of two different things to think about. One is that most cases are probably not. It might be somebody's primary home that may be what's forfeited. And in fact, that's where the legislature has really been kind of pushing to to challenge civil forfeiture is in the taking of people's homes, especially under like tax law violations, et cetera, especially for primary residences. But in this, so this has that case. So there's a case of like, this isn't your typical civil forfeiture.
The amount of money is much bigger than typically.
And maybe even the amount of crime, et cetera, right? It like has a glitzy kind of vibe to it. The brass
all the
knuckles,
makings
et
of a
cetera.
Netflix series.
Exactly, exactly. And then there's, I think, the question on the back end, which is like, so right now, a similar process is happening at the Commonwealth level, right? Which is that we have this money coming in from essentially companies that were found guilty for dealing with opioids, and right. But there's a public process for deciding where that money goes within the Commonwealth as it's awarded to the Commonwealth. We don't have a public process for deciding exactly how Hampden County, if this money goes to the DA's office, will distribute these funds. And so I think that there's the question of both, like, do you agree with civil forfeiture? And then you're like, if we do agree with it, what is the public process for making sure that it affects the communities that were actually affected by Corey Taylor's crimes?
2 follow-ups for you, Stephanie. What is the DA in Hampden County saying about why they think they should be able to keep these funds? And where does this stand in the courts in terms of when a decision's going to be made?
Sure. So I checked the docket as recently as last night, and there's been a tentative settlement announced in the public record, but it's not over right until the fat lady sings and someone signs on the dotted line. So it's still, I mean, I suppose it could still collapse. It feels like it's very, very close. The litigation has been going on for years. And the one thing that's public, the DA hasn't been saying much at all because it's still a pending case. But in the original filings, the argument was he was dealing a lot of drugs. I was always curious.
And there were also some weapons, too. So there was, like,
right.
public safety concern, saying he was protecting an arsenal, et cetera.
And even where his home in Holyoke was located was kind of confounding to me because it's right on this main street in Holyoke. It's a really decrepit-looking building.
On the outside.
On the exterior. But the interior was something else entirely.
He had renovated it to be some sort of luxury
dwelling. That's how they, and the bottom floor was a bay for all these exotic cars, and he had money and drugs and guns stashed in various like sophisticated hidey holes.
So is there a date yet that we can expect, maybe? Or they're just going to keep negotiating and you'll keep us updated in the Springfield Republican?
I'll keep you updated.
All right. We're going to move now to potential changes coming into public speaking at some city meetings. Chris, Reminder Publications' Dennis Hackett reported on this. I'm going to quote a little bit of his work. Public speak out sessions prior to Springfield City Council meetings could soon be part of the agenda for regular meetings if a pilot introduced at the council's March 9th meeting moves forward. What's the goal, Chris, as I understand it? They're going to do a pilot program here. What's the goal of this 3-month-long pilot program?
Yeah, from my understanding, basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure and encourage counselors to actually be more present to hear what people have to say during these public speak sessions. It's not uncommon, honestly, to see counselors kind of filtering in to the chamber as this is happening. So as a resident, you can see where it could be disheartening or you feel like you are speaking to nobody when you have things that are really important to you and the chamber is half empty and half of the city council isn't actually present yet.
Because as I understand it, just real quick for context, as I understand it, the public speak out is at 6 and the meeting formally doesn't start till 6:30.
Yes, and they're actually, if I'm recalling correctly, they're actually posted kind of as separate items when you're looking at agendas.
Yeah, so it would be nice if the city council were there, but they have lives too outside of this, and they're elected to show up starting at 6:30. Bridgette Davis, you have a very skeptical look on your face. What are you thinking?
I mean, I just think it's interesting. How about a pilot that they actually arrive by 6? Right? You're trying to train essentially the entire public to show up at a different time versus a smaller set of people who are elected and have a responsibility to be there.
And they're going to be there
6.
anyway.
Right, they're going to be there anyways. And if it needs to start at 6:30, that's fine. I mean, so I think I'm glad that some of the counselors are really moving to make sure that the voices of residents are heard. But I also am incredibly skeptical about moving it into the meeting versus just making counselors be responsible for being there.
One of the things that I like about the way this is currently structured is there can be back and forth with members of the city council and the member of the public that are speaking. As I understand it, the open meeting law, if you move it into part of the meeting, it becomes this, you get a 1 to 3 minute thing, which is what we see at a lot of cities around here. Pittsfield does it, I think East Hampton does it. Mm-hmm. And it's this, people speak for a minute or up to 3 minutes. Nobody says anything. And then the next person comes up and says their bit. And oftentimes it takes either an industrious reporter to get curious about the thing that one person has said, or a city councilor who's excited about the thing or curious about the thing that's brought up. Otherwise, it just dies a slow death. Stephanie Berry, what do you think of this?
Well, I would agree. I would agree, first of all, that I think it should be part of the pilot program that the elected officials have to be there. They should be obligated to be there during the public speak out. Those people are their constituents. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to just skip that because that's supposed to be, part of their mission. In terms of the feedback, I mean, I'd like to see residents pose specific questions to counselors as opposed to just making a statement. I think it might be effective to pose a question that begs an answer.
Yeah. Chris Maza, what are you going to be watching as this unfolds?
Well, I think that this is a part of, I like the spirit of this in that it's trying to make the government more available to the people, and we're seeing that in more and more places. Westfield is having a similar kind of discussion about when meetings should start so that they can be more accessible to their constituents in the city council. But yeah, what I'm going to be watching is to see just how effective this is, and if people are finding that they are being heard by more of the council.
Well, certainly to be continued, and an interesting one to keep watching, not just here in Springfield, but to see if other city councils make adjustments to their own practices. All right, we're going to move on to our scoops, praise, and prediction portion of the show, where I asked the panel to give us the inside scoop on a story that they're working on, heap some praise on a newsworthy nugget, or maybe get crazy and make a prediction about the week's news. Chris Maza, I'll start with you on the phone. Scoop, praise, prediction, what's on your mind?
No, I think in terms of praise, I want to praise just the work that we have done with covering the happenings heading into the St. Patrick's Parade weekend this weekend.
In Holyoke.
Yes, in Holyoke. I had a chance to talk with the committee president, Jim Wildman, as well as the Holyoke Grand Colleen, and I think that they are great representatives of what this parade represents, not only for Holyoke, but for the greater community. And I'm looking forward to another great weekend that really, on top of everything else, creates a great economic opportunity for the area.
Check that out in the reminder. Stephanie Berry, what's on your mind this morning?
Well, I have a potential scoop.
Love it. Let's hear it.
I'm researching a potential story about salaries among Western Mass CEOs of nonprofits. There's a lot of focus on public employee salaries, but I think there may be some surprises in the compensation that certain organizations, their leaders are getting.
A cliffhanger from Stephanie's notebook. I love it. be looking in the Republican for that one. Bridgette Davis, what's on your mind? Scoop, praise, prediction? Maybe not a scoop.
Yeah, I don't have a scoop. I have some praise also for local reporting. So it's been award season in the local newspaper kind of circuit, and a number of our local papers have won awards and reporters. And I moved here from Chicago a couple of years ago and spent a lot of time, most of my life, in the Midwest. And we should never take for granted the great reporting and great local news that we have in this area. So I just want to praise for
Here,
that.
here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This show would not exist if it weren't for the reporting in this region. We're here to talk about it and elevate it. All right. My thanks to this week's panel, Chris Maza, Stephanie Barry, and Bridgette Davis. You've been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. Catch us every Friday at 9. Go out there and have a great one, folks.